Chapter 9. The Bab's Stay in Shiraz After the Pilgrimage, Part 2. Soon after the arrival of Mullah Hussein at Shiraz, the voice of the people again rose in protest against him. The fear and indignation of the multitude were excited by the knowledge of his continued and intimate intercourse with the Bab. "He again has come to our city," they clamored. "He again has raised the standard of revolt and is, together with his chief, contemplating a still fiercer onslaught upon our time-honored institutions." So grave and menacing became the situation that the Bab instructed Mullah Hussein to regain, by way of Yazd, his native province of Khorasan. He likewise dismissed the rest of his companions, who had gathered in Shiraz, and bade them return to Isfahan. He retained Mullah Abdul Karim, to whom he assigned the duty of transcribing his writings. These precautionary measures, which the Bab deemed wise to undertake, relieved him from the immediate danger of violence from the infuriated people of Shiraz, and served to lend a fresh impetus to the propagation of his faith beyond the limits of that city. His disciples, who had spread throughout the length and breadth of the country, fearlessly proclaimed to the multitude of their countrymen the regenerating power of the newborn revelation. The fame of the Bab had been noised abroad and had reached the ears of those who held the highest seats of authority, both in the capital and throughout the provinces. A wave of passionate inquiry swayed the minds and hearts of both the leaders and the masses of the people. Amazement and wonder had seized those who had heard from the lips of the immediate messengers of the Bab the tales of those signs and testimonies which had heralded the birth of his manifestation. The dignitaries of state and church either attended in person or delegated their ablest representatives to inquire into the truth and character of this remarkable movement. Muhammad Shah himself was moved to ascertain the veracity of these reports and to inquire into their nature. He delegated Sayyid Yahya-i Darabi, the most learned, the most eloquent, and the most influential of his subjects, to interview the Bab and to report to him the results of his investigations. The Shah had implicit confidence in his impartiality, in his competence and profound spiritual insight. He occupied a position of such preeminence among the leading figures in Persia that at whatever meeting he happened to be present, no matter how great the number of ecclesiastical leaders who attended it, he was invariably its chief speaker. None would dare to assert his views in his presence. They all reverently observed silence before him. All testified to his sagacity, his unsurpassed knowledge, and mature wisdom. In those days, Sayyid Yahya was residing in Tehran, in the house of Mirza Lutf Ali, the Master of Ceremonies to the Shah, as the honored guest of His Imperial Majesty. The Shah confidentially signified through Mirza Lutf Ali his desire and pleasure that Sayyid Yahya should proceed to Shiraz and investigate the matter in person. "Tell him from us," commanded the sovereign, "that inasmuch as we repose the utmost confidence in his integrity and admire his moral and intellectual standards and regard him as the most suitable among the divines of our realm, we expect him to proceed to Shiraz, to inquire thoroughly into the episode of the Sayyid-i Bab, and to inform us of the results of his investigations. We shall then know what measures it behoves us to take." Sayyid Yahya had been himself desirous of obtaining first-hand knowledge of the claims of the Bab, but had been unable, owing to adverse circumstances, to undertake the journey to Fars. The message of Muhammad Shah decided him to carry out his long-cherished intention. Assuring his sovereign of his readiness to comply with his wish, he immediately set out for Shiraz. On his way, he conceived the various questions which he thought he would submit to the Bab. Upon the replies which the latter gave to these questions would, in his view, depend the truth and validity of his mission. Upon his arrival at Shiraz, he met Mullah Sheikh Ali, surnamed Azim, with whom he had been intimately associated while in Khorasan. He asked him whether he was satisfied with his interview with the Bab. "You should meet him," Azim replied, "and seek independently to acquaint yourself with his mission. As a friend, I would advise you to exercise the utmost consideration in your conversations with him, lest you too, in the end, should be obliged to deplore any act of discourtesy towards him." Sayyid Yahya met the Bab at the home of Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali, and exercised in his attitude towards him the courtesy which Azim had counselled him to observe. For about 2 hours he directed the attention of the Bab to the most abstruse and bewildering themes in the metaphysical teachings of Islam, to the obscurest passages of the Quran, and to the mysterious traditions and prophecies of the Imams of the faith. The Bab at first listened to his learned references to the law and prophecies of Islam, noted all his questions, and began to give to each a brief but persuasive reply. The conciseness and lucidity of his answers excited the wonder and admiration of Sayyid Yahya. He was overpowered by a sense of humiliation at his own presumptuousness and pride. His sense of superiority completely vanished. As he arose to depart, he addressed the Bab in these words: "Please God, I shall, in the course of my next audience with you, submit the rest of my questions, and with them shall conclude my inquiry." As soon as he retired, he joined Azim, to whom he related the account of his interview. "I have, in his presence," he told him, "expatiated unduly upon my own learning. He was able in a few words to answer my questions and to resolve my perplexities. I felt so abased before him that I hurriedly begged leave to retire." Azim reminded him of his counsel and begged him not to forget this time the advice he had given him. In the course of his second interview, Sayyid Yahya, to his amazement, discovered that all the questions which he had intended to submit to the Bab had vanished from his memory. He contented himself with matters that seemed irrelevant to the object of his inquiry. He soon found, to his still greater surprise, that the Bab was answering, with the same lucidity and conciseness that had characterized his previous replies, those same questions which he had momentarily forgotten. "I seemed to have fallen fast asleep," he later observed. "His words, his answers to questions which I had forgotten to ask, reawakened me. A voice still kept whispering in my ear, 'Might not this after all have been an accidental coincidence?' I was too agitated to collect my thoughts. I again begged leave to retire. Azim, whom I had subsequently met, received me with cold indifference and sternly remarked, 'Would that schools had been utterly abolished, and that neither of us had entered one. Through our little-mindedness and conceit we are withholding from ourselves the redeeming grace of God, and are causing pain to him who is the fountain thereof. Will you not this time beseech God to grant that you may be enabled to attain his presence with becoming humility and detachment, that perchance he may graciously relieve you from the oppression of uncertainty and doubt?' I resolved that in my third interview with the Bab I would, in my inmost heart, request him to reveal for me a commentary on the Surah of Kawthar. Footnote Quran 108. I determined not to breathe that request in his presence. Should he, unasked by me, reveal this commentary in a manner that would immediately distinguish it in my eyes from the prevailing standards current among the commentators on the Quran, I then would be convinced of the divine character of his mission, and would readily embrace his cause. If not, I would refuse to acknowledge him. As soon as I was ushered into his presence, a sense of fear for which I could not account seized me. My limbs quivered as I beheld his face. I, who on repeated occasions had been introduced into the presence of the Shah and had never discovered the slightest trace of timidity in myself, was now so awed and shaken that I could not remain standing on my feet. The Bab, beholding my plight, arose from his seat, advanced towards me, and taking hold of my hand, seated me beside him. "Seek from me," he said, "whatever is your heart's desire. I will readily reveal it to you." I was speechless with wonder. Like a babe that can neither understand nor speak, I felt powerless to respond. He smiled as he gazed at me and said, "Were I to reveal for you the commentary on the Surah of Kawthar, would you acknowledge that my words are born of the Spirit of God? Would you recognize that my utterance can in no wise be associated with sorcery or magic?" Tears flowed from my eyes as I heard him speak these words. All I was able to utter was this verse of the Quran: "O our Lord, with ourselves have we dealt unjustly. If thou forgive us not and have not pity on us, we shall surely be of those who perish." It was still early in the afternoon when the Bab requested Haji Mirza Syed Ali to bring his pen case and some paper. He then started to reveal his commentary on the Surah of Kawthar. How am I to describe this scene of inexpressible majesty? Verses streamed from his pen with a rapidity that was truly astonishing. The incredible swiftness of his writing, the soft and gentle murmur of his voice, and the stupendous force of his style amazed and bewildered me. He continued in this manner until the approach of sunset. He did not pause until the entire commentary of the Surah was completed. He then laid down his pen and asked for tea. Soon after, he began to read it aloud in my presence. My heart leapt madly as I heard him pour out in accents of unutterable sweetness those treasures enshrined in that sublime commentary. I was so entranced by its beauty that 3 times over I was on the verge of fainting. He sought to revive my failing strength with a few drops of rose water, which he caused to be sprinkled on my face. This restored my vigor and enabled me to follow his reading to the end. When he had completed his recital, the Bab arose to depart. He entrusted me, as he left, to the care of his maternal uncle. He is to be your guest, he told him, until the time when, in collaboration with Mullah Abdul Karim, shall have finished transcribing this newly revealed commentary, and shall have verified the correctness of the transcribed copy. Mullah Abdul Karim and I devoted 3 days and 3 nights to this work. We would, in turn, read aloud to each other a portion of that commentary until the whole of it had been transcribed. We verified all the traditions in the text and found them to be entirely accurate. Such was the state of certitude to which I had attained, that if all the powers of the earth were to be leagued against me, they would be powerless to shake my confidence in the greatness of his cause. As I had, since my arrival at Shiraz, been living in the home of Hussein Khan, the governor of Fars, I felt that my prolonged absence from his house might excite his suspicion and inflame his anger. I therefore determined to take leave of Haji Mirza Syed Ali and Mullah Abdul Karim, and to regain the residence of the governor. On my arrival I found that Hussein Khan, who in the meantime had been searching for me, was eager to know whether I had fallen a victim to the Bab's magic influence. No one but God, I replied, who alone can change the hearts of men, is able to captivate the heart of Syed Yahya. Whoso can ensnare his heart is of God, and his word unquestionably the voice of truth. My answer silenced the governor. In his conversation with others, I subsequently learned, he had expressed the view that I too had fallen a hopeless victim to the charm of that youth. He had even written to Muhammad Shah, and complained that during my stay in Shiraz I had refused all manner of intercourse with the ulamas of that city. Though nominally my guest, he wrote to his sovereign, he frequently absents himself for a number of consecutive days and nights from my house. That he has become a Babi, that he has been heart and soul enslaved by the will of the Sayyidi Bab, I have ceased to entertain any doubt. Muhammad Shah himself, at one of the state functions in his capital, was reported to have addressed these words to Haji Mirza Akazi. We have been lately informed that Sayyid Yahya-i Darabi has become a Babi. If this be true, it behoves us to cease belittling the cause of that Sayyid. Hussein Khan, on his part, received the following imperial command: "It is strictly forbidden to any one of our subjects to utter such words as would tend to detract from the exalted rank of Sayyid Yahya-i Darabi. He is of noble lineage, a man of great learning, of perfect and consummate virtue. He will in no circumstances incline his ear to any cause unless he believes it to be conducive to the advancement of the best interests of our realm, and to the well-being of the faith of Islam." Upon receipt of this imperial injunction, Hussein Khan, unable to resist me openly, strove privily to undermine my authority. His face betrayed an implacable enmity and hate. He failed, however, in view of the marked favours bestowed upon me by the Shah, either to harm my person or to discredit my name. I was subsequently commanded by the Bab to journey to Burujird, and there acquaint my father with the new message. He urged me to exercise towards him the utmost forbearance and consideration. From my confidential conversations with him, I gathered that he was unwilling to repudiate the truth of the message I had brought him. He preferred, however, to be left alone and to be allowed to pursue his own way. Another dignitary of the realm who dispassionately investigated and ultimately embraced the message of the Bab was Mullah Muhammad Ali, a native of Zanjan, whom the Bab surnamed Hujat-i Zanjani. He was a man of independent mind, noted for extreme originality and freedom from all forms of traditional restraint. He denounced the whole hierarchy of the ecclesiastical leaders of his country, from the BAB-i Arba'i down to the humblest mullah among his contemporaries. A reference says of the BAB-i Arba'i, literally meaning the four gates, each of whom claimed to be an intermediary between the absent imam and his followers. He despised their character, deplored their degeneracy, and expatiated upon their vices. He even, prior to his conversion, betrayed an attitude of careless contempt for Sheikh Ahmad-i Asai and Sayyid Kazim-i Rashdi. He was so filled with horror at the misdeeds that had stained the history of Shia Islam that whoever belonged to that sect, no matter how high his personal attainments, was regarded by him as unworthy of his consideration. Not infrequently did cases of fierce controversy arise between him and the divines of Zanjan, which, but for the personal intervention of the Shah, would have led to grave disorder and bloodshed. He was eventually summoned to the capital and, in the presence of his opponents, representatives of the ecclesiastical heads of Tehran and other cities, was called upon to vindicate his claim. Single-handed and alone, he would establish his superiority over his adversaries and would silence their clamor. Although in their hearts they dissented from his views and condemned his conduct, they were compelled to acknowledge outwardly his authority and to confirm his opinion. As soon as the call from Shiraz reached his ears, Hujat deputed one of his disciples, Mullah Iskandar, in whom he reposed the fullest confidence, to inquire into the whole matter and to report to him the result of his investigations. Utterly indifferent to the praise and censure of his countrymen whose integrity he suspected and whose judgment he disdained, he sent his delegate to Shiraz with explicit instructions to conduct a minute and independent inquiry. Mullah Iskandar attained the presence of the Bab and felt immediately the regenerating power of his influence. He tarried 40 days in Shiraz, during which time he imbibed the principles of the faith and acquired, according to his capacity, a knowledge of the measure of its glory. With the approval of the Bab, he returned to Zanjan. He arrived at a time when all the leading ulamas of that city had assembled in the presence of Hujat. As soon as he appeared, Hujat inquired whether he believed in or rejected the new revelation. Mullah Iskandar submitted the writings of the Bab which he had brought with him, and asserted that whatever should be the verdict of his master, the same would he deem it his obligation to follow. "What?" angrily exclaimed Hujat. "But for the presence of this distinguished company I would have chastised you severely. How dare you consider matters of belief to be dependent upon the approbation or rejection of others?" Receiving from the hand of his messenger the copy of the Qayyumul Azma, he, as soon as he had perused a page of that book, fell prostrate upon the ground and exclaimed, "I bear witness that these words which I have read proceed from the same source as that of the Koran. Whoso has recognized the truth of that sacred book must needs testify to the divine origin of these words, and must needs submit to the precepts inculcated by their author. I take you, members of this assembly, as my witnesses. I pledge such allegiance to the author of this revelation that should he ever pronounce the night to be day and declare the sun to be a shadow, I would unreservedly submit to his judgment, and would regard his verdict as the voice of truth. Whoso denies him, him will I regard as the repudiator of God himself." With these words he terminated the proceedings of that gathering. We have, in the preceding pages, referred to the expulsion of Qudus and of Mullah Sadiq from Shiraz, and have attempted to describe, however inadequately, the chastisement inflicted upon them by the tyrannical and rapacious Hussein Khan. A word should now be said regarding the nature of their activities after their expulsion from that city. For a few days they continued to journey together, after which they separated, Qudus departing for Kirman in order to interview Haji Mirza Karim Khan, and Mullah Sadiq directing his steps towards Yazd, with the intention of pursuing among the ulamas of that province the work which he had been so cruelly forced to abandon in Fars. Qudus was received upon his arrival at the home of Haji Syed Javad-i Kirmani, whom he had known in Karbala and whose scholarship, skill and competence were universally recognized by the people of Kirman. At all the gatherings held in his home, he invariably assigned to his youthful guest the seat of honor, and treated him with extreme deference and courtesy. So marked a preference for so young and seemingly mediocre a person kindled the envy of the disciples of Haji Mirza Karim Khan, who, describing in vivid and exaggerated language the honors which were being lavished upon Qudus, sought to excite the dormant hostility of their chief. "Behold," they whispered in his ears, "he who was the best beloved, the trusted and most intimate companion of the Syed-i BAB, is now the honored guest of one who is admittedly the most powerful inhabitant of Kirman. If he be allowed to live in close companionship with Haji Syed Javad, he will no doubt instill his poison into his soul, and will fashion him as the instrument whereby he will succeed in disrupting your authority and in extinguishing your fame." Alarmed by these evil whisperings, the cowardly Haji Mirza Karim Khan appealed to the governor and induced him to call in person upon Haji Syed Javad, and demand that he terminate that dangerous association. The representations of the governor inflamed the wrath of the intemperate Haji Syed Javad. "How often," he violently protested, "have I advised you to ignore the whisperings of this evil plotter? My forbearance has emboldened him. Let him beware lest he overstep his bounds. Does he desire to usurp my position? Is he not the man who receives into his home thousands of abject and ignoble people, and overwhelms them with his servile flattery? Has he not again and again striven to exalt the ungodly and to silence the innocent? Has he not, year after year, by reinforcing the hand of the evildoer, sought to ally himself with him and gratify his carnal desires? Does he not, until this day, persist in uttering his blasphemies against all that is pure and holy in Islam? My silence seems to have added to his temerity and insolence. He gives himself the liberty of committing the foulest deeds, and refuses to allow me to receive and honor in my own home a man of such integrity, such learning and nobleness. Should he refuse to desist from his practice, let him be warned that the worst elements of the city will, at my instigation, expel him from Kirman." Disconcerted by such vehement denunciations, the governor apologized for his action. Ere he retired, he assured Haji Syed Javad that he need entertain no fear, that he himself would endeavor to awaken Haji Mirza Karim Khan to the folly of his behavior, and would induce him to repent. The Syed's message stung Haji Mirza Karim Khan. Convulsed by a feeling of intense resentment which he could neither suppress nor gratify, he relinquished all hopes of acquiring the undisputed leadership of the people of Kirman. That open challenge sounded the death knell of his cherished ambitions. In the privacy of his home, Haji Syed Javad heard Qudus recount all the details of his activities from the day of his departure from Karbala until his arrival at Kirman. The circumstances of his conversion and his subsequent pilgrimage with the BAB stirred the imagination and kindled the flame of faith in the heart of his host, who preferred, however, to conceal his belief, in the hope of being able to guard more effectively the interests of the newly established community. "Your noble resolve," Qudus lovingly assured him, "will in itself be regarded as a notable service rendered to the cause of God. The Almighty will reinforce your efforts and will establish for all time your ascendancy over your opponents." The incident was related to me by a certain Mirza Abdullah-i Gauga, who, while in Kirman, had heard it from the lips of Haji Syed Javad himself. The sincerity of the expressed intentions of the Syed has been fully vindicated by the splendid manner in which, as a result of his endeavors, he succeeded in resisting the encroachments of the insidious Haji Mirza Karim Khan, who, had he remained unchallenged, would have caused incalculable harm to the faith. From Kirman, Qudus decided to leave for Yazd, and from thence to proceed to Ardikan, Nayin, Ardistan, Isfahan, Kashan, Qum, and Tehran. In each of these cities, notwithstanding the obstacles that beset his path, he succeeded in instilling into the understanding of his hearers the principles which he had so bravely risen to advocate. I have heard Aqi Kalim, the brother of Baha'u'llah, describe in the following terms his meeting with Qudus in Tehran. The charm of his person, his extreme affability, combined with the dignity of bearing, appealed to even the most careless observer. Whoever was intimately associated with him was seized with an insatiable admiration for the charm of that youth. We watched him one day perform his ablutions, and were struck by the gracefulness which distinguished him from the rest of the worshippers in the performance of so ordinary a rite. He seemed in our eyes to be the very incarnation of purity and grace. In Tehran, Qudus was admitted into the presence of Baha'u'llah, after which he proceeded to Mazindaran, where, in his native town of Bafurush, in the home of his father, he lived for about 2 years, during which time he was surrounded by the loving devotion of his family and kindred. His father had married, on the death of his first wife, a lady who treated Qudus with a kindness and care that no mother could have hoped to surpass. She longed to witness his wedding, and was often heard to express her fears lest she should have to carry with her to the grave the supreme joy of her heart. "The day of my wedding," Qudus observed, "is not yet come. That day will be unspeakably glorious, not within the confines of this house, but out in the open air, under the vault of heaven, in the midst of the Sabzi Maidan. Before the gaze of the multitude, there shall I celebrate my nuptials and witness the consummation of my hopes." 3 years later, when that lady learned of the circumstances attending the martyrdom of Qudus in the Sabzi Maidan, she recalled his prophetic words and understood their meaning. Qudus remained in Bafurush until the time when he was joined by Mullah Hussein after the latter's return from his visit to the BAB in the castle of Marku. From Bafurush they set out for Khorasan, a journey rendered memorable by deeds so heroic that none of their countrymen could hope to rival them. As to Mullah Sadiq, as soon as he arrived at Yazd, he inquired of a trusted friend, a native of Khorasan, about the latest development connected with the progress of the cause in that province. He was particularly anxious to be enlightened concerning the activities of Mirza Ahmad-i Ashgandi, and expressed his surprise at the seeming inactivity of one who, at a time when the mystery of the faith was still undivulged, had displayed such conspicuous zeal in preparing the people for the acceptance of the expected manifestation. Mirza Ahmad, he was told, secluded himself for a considerable period of time in his own home, and there concentrated his energies upon the preparation of a learned and voluminous compilation of Islamic traditions and prophecies relating to the time and the character of the promised dispensation. He collected more than 12,000 traditions of the most explicit character, the authenticity of which was universally recognized, and resolved to take whatever steps were required for the copying and the dissemination of that book. By encouraging his fellow disciples to quote publicly from its contents in all congregations and gatherings, he hoped he would be able to remove such hindrances as might impede the progress of the cause he had at heart. When he arrived at Yazd, he was warmly welcomed by his maternal uncle, Sayyid Hussein-i Ashgandi, the foremost mujtahid of that city, who, a few days before the arrival of his nephew, had sent him a written request to hasten to Yazd and deliver him from the machinations of Haji Mirza Karim Khan, whom he regarded as a dangerous though unavowed enemy of Islam. The mujtahid called upon Mirza Ahmad to combat by every means in his power Haji Mirza Khan's pernicious influence, and wished him to establish permanently his residence in that city, that he might, through incessant exhortations and appeals, succeed in enlightening the minds of the people as to the true aims and intentions cherished by that malignant enemy. Mirza Ahmad, concealing from his uncle his original intention to leave for Shiraz, decided to prolong his stay in Yazd. He showed him the book which he had compiled and shared its contents with the ulamas, who thronged from every quarter of the city to meet him. All were greatly impressed by the industry, the erudition, and the zeal which the compiler of that celebrated work had demonstrated. Among those who came to visit Mirza Ahmad was a certain Mirza Taqi, a man who was wicked, ambitious, and haughty, who had recently returned from Najaf, where he had completed his studies, and had been elevated to the rank of mujtahid. In the course of his conversation with Mirza Ahmad, he expressed a desire to peruse that book, and to be allowed to retain it for a few days that he might acquire a fuller understanding of its contents. Syed Hussein and his nephew both acceded to his wish. Mirza Taqi, who was to have returned the book, failed to redeem his promise. Mirza Ahmad, who had already suspected the insincerity of Mirza Taqi's intentions, urged his uncle to remind the borrower of the pledge he had given. "Tell your master," was the insolent reply to the messenger sent to reclaim the book, "that after having satisfied myself as to the mischievous character of that compilation, I decided to destroy it. Last night I threw it into the pond, thereby obliterating its pages." Moved by deep and determined indignation at such deceitfulness and impertinence, Syed Hussein resolved to wreak his vengeance upon him. Mirza Ahmad succeeded, however, by his wise counsels, in pacifying the anger of his infuriated uncle, and in dissuading him from carrying out the measures which he proposed to take. "This punishment," he urged, "which you contemplate, will excite the agitation of the people and will stir up mischief and sedition. It will gravely interfere with the efforts which you wish me to exert in order to extinguish the influence of Haji Mirza Karim Khan. He will undoubtedly seize the occasion to denounce you as a Babi, and will hold me responsible for having been the cause of your conversion. By this means he will both undermine your authority and earn the esteem and gratitude of the people. Leave him in the hands of God." Mullah Sadiq was greatly pleased to learn from the account of this incident that Mirza Ahmad was actually residing in Yazd, and that no obstacles stood in the way of his meeting with him. He went immediately to the masjid in which Syed Hussein was leading the congregational prayer, and in which Mirza Ahmad delivered the sermon. Taking his seat in the first row among the worshippers, he joined them in prayer, after which he went straight to Syed Hussein and publicly embraced him. Uninvited, he immediately afterwards ascended the pulpit and prepared to address the faithful. Syed Hussein, though at first startled, preferred to raise no objection, being curious to discover the motive and ascertain the degree of the learning of this sudden intruder. He motioned to his nephew to refrain from opposing him. Mullah Sadiq prefaced his discourse with one of the best-known and most exquisitely written homilies of the Bab, after which he addressed the congregation in these terms: "Render thanks to God, O people of learning, for behold, the gate of divine knowledge, which you deem to have been closed, is now wide open. The river of everlasting life has streamed forth from the city of SHIRAZ, and is now conferring untold blessings upon the people of this land. Whoever has partaken of one drop from this ocean of heavenly grace, no matter how humble and unlettered, has discovered in himself the power to unravel the profoundest mysteries, and has felt capable of expounding the most abstruse themes of ancient wisdom. And whoever, though he be the most learned expounder of the faith of Islam, has chosen to rely upon his own competence and power, and has disdained the message of God, has condemned himself to irretrievable degradation and loss." A wave of indignation and dismay swept over the entire congregation as these words of Mullah Sadiq pealed out this momentous announcement. The masjid rang with cries of "Blasphemy!" which an infuriated congregation shouted in horror against the speaker. "Descend from the pulpit!" rose the voice of Syed Hussein amid the clamour and tumult of the people, as he motioned to Mullah Sadiq to hold his peace and to retire. No sooner had he regained the floor of the masjid than the whole company of the assembled worshippers rushed upon him and overwhelmed him with blows. Syed Hussein immediately intervened, vigorously dispersed the crowd, and seizing the hand of Mullah Sadiq, forcibly drew him to his side. "Withhold your hands," he appealed to the multitude. "Leave him in my custody. I will take him to my home and will closely investigate the matter. A sudden fit of madness may have caused him to utter these words. I will myself examine him. If I find that his utterances are premeditated, and that he himself firmly believes in the things which he has declared, I will with my own hands inflict upon him the punishment imposed by the law of Islam." By this solemn assurance, Mullah Sadiq was delivered from the savage attacks of his assailants. Divested of his abba and turban, deprived of his sandals and staff, bruised and shaken by the injuries he had received, he was entrusted to the care of Syed Hussein's attendants, who, as they forced their passage among the crowd, succeeded eventually in conducting him to the home of their master. Mullah Yusuf-e Ardibili, likewise was subjected in those days to a persecution fiercer and more determined than the savage onslaught which the people of Yaz had directed against Mullah Sadiq. But for the intervention of Mirza Ahmad and the assistance of his uncle, he would have fallen a victim to the wrath of a ferocious enemy. When Mullah Sadiq and Mullah Yusuf-i Ardibili arrived at Kirman, they again had to submit to similar indignities and to suffer similar afflictions at the hands of Haji Mirza Karim Khan and his associates. Haji Syed Javad's persistent exertions freed them eventually from the grasp of their persecutors and enabled them to proceed to Khorasan. Though hunted and harassed by their foes, the Bab's immediate disciples, together with their companions in different parts of Persia, were undeterred by such criminal acts from the accomplishment of their task. Unswerving in their purpose and immovable in their convictions, they continued to battle with the dark forces that assailed them every step of their path. By their unstinted devotion and unexampled fortitude, they were able to demonstrate to many of their countrymen the ennobling influence of the faith they had arisen to champion. While Wahid, title given by the Bab to Syed Yahya-i Darabi, was still in Shiraz, Haji Syed Javad-i Karbilai arrived and was introduced by Haji Mirza Syed Ali into the presence of the Bab. In a tablet which he addressed to Wahid and Haji Syed Javad, the Bab extolled the firmness of their faith and stressed the unalterable character of their devotion. The latter had met and known the Bab before the declaration of his mission, and had been a fervent admirer of those extraordinary traits of character which had distinguished him ever since his childhood. At a later time he met Baha'u'llah in Baghdad, and became the recipient of his special favor. When, a few years afterwards, Baha'u'llah was exiled to Adrianople, he, already very much advanced in years, returned to Persia, tarried a while in the province of Iraq, and thence proceeded to Khorasan. His kindly disposition, extreme forbearance, and unaffected simplicity earned him the appellation of the Syed-i-Nur, literally meaning radiant Syed. Haji Syed Javad one day, while crossing a street in Tehran, suddenly saw the Shah as he was passing on horseback. Undisturbed by the presence of his sovereign, he calmly approached and greeted him. His venerable figure and dignity of bearing pleased the Shah immensely. He acknowledged his salute and invited him to come and see him. Such was the reception accorded him that the courtiers of the Shah were moved with envy. "Does not your Imperial Majesty realize," they protested, "that this Haji Syed Javad is none other than the man who, even prior to the declaration of the Syedi Bab, had proclaimed himself a Babi and had pledged his undying loyalty to his person?" The Shah, perceiving the malice which actuated their accusation, was sorely displeased, and rebuked them for their temerity and low-mindedness. "How strange," is reported to have exclaimed, "whoever is distinguished by the uprightness of his conduct and the courtesy of his manners, my people forthwith denounce him as a Babi and regard him as an object worthy of my condemnation." Haji Syed Javad spent the last days of his life in Kerman, and remained until his last hour a staunch supporter of the faith. He never wavered in his convictions, nor relaxed in his unsparing endeavors for the diffusion of the cause. Sheikh Sultan-i Karbilai, whose ancestors ranked among the leading ulamas of Karbala, and who himself had been a firm supporter and intimate companion of Syed Kazim, was also among those who, in those days, had met the Bab in Shiraz. It was he who, at a later time, proceeded to Selemani in search of Baha'u'llah, and whose daughter was subsequently given in marriage to Akhe-i Kalim. When he arrived at Shiraz, he was accompanied by Sheikh Hassan-i Zunusi, to whom we have referred in the early pages of this narrative. To him the Bab assigned the task of transcribing, in collaboration with Mullah Abdul Karim, the tablets which he had lately revealed. Sheikh Sultan, who had been too ill at the time of his arrival to meet the Bab, received one night, while still on his sickbed, a message from his beloved, informing him that at about 2 hours after sunset he would himself visit him. That night the Ethiopian servant, who was acting as lantern-bearer to his master, was instructed to walk in advance at a distance which would keep away the attention of the people from him, and to extinguish the lantern as soon as he had reached his destination. I have heard Sheikh Sultan himself describe that nocturnal visit. The Bab, who had bidden me extinguish the lamp in my room ere he arrived, came straight to my bedside. In the midst of the darkness which enveloped us, I was holding fast to the hem of his garment, and was imploring him, "Fulfill my desire, O beloved of my heart, and allow me to sacrifice myself for thee, for no one else except thee is able to confer upon me this favor." "O Sheikh," the Bab replied, "I too yearn to immolate myself upon the altar of sacrifice. It behoves us both to cling to the garment of the best beloved, and to seek from him the joy and glory of martyrdom in his path. Rest assured I will, in your behalf, supplicate the Almighty to enable you to attain his presence. Remember me on that day, a day such as the world has never seen before." As the hour of parting approached, he placed in my hand a gift which he asked me to expend for myself. I tried to refuse, but he begged me to accept it. Finally, I acceded to his wish, whereupon he arose and departed. The allusion of the Bab that night to his best beloved excited my wonder and curiosity. In the years that followed, I oftentimes believed that the one to whom the Bab had referred was none other than Tahiri. I even imagined Seyyid-i-Uluf to be that person. I was sorely perplexed and knew not how to unravel this mystery. When I reached Karbila and attained the presence of Baha'u'llah, I became firmly convinced that he alone could claim such affection from the Bab, that he, and only he, could be worthy of such adoration. The second Nowruz after the declaration of the Bab's mission, which fell on the 21st day of the month of Rabiul Awwal in the year AH 1262, AD 1846, found the Bab still in Shiraz, enjoying, under circumstances of comparative tranquillity and ease, the blessings of undisturbed association with his family and kindred. Quietly and unceremoniously, he celebrated the festival of Nowruz in his own home, and in accordance with his invariable custom, bountifully conferred upon both his mother and his wife the marks of his affection and favor. By the wisdom of his counsels and the tenderness of his love, he cheered their hearts and dispelled their apprehensions. He bequeathed to them all his possessions, and transferred to their names the title of his property. In a document which he himself wrote and signed, he directed that his house and its furniture, as well as the rest of his estate, should be regarded as the exclusive property of his mother and his wife, and that upon the death of the former, her share of the property should revert to his wife. The mother of the Bab failed at first to recognize the significance of the mission proclaimed by her son. She remained for a time unaware of the magnitude of the forces latent in his revelation. As she approached the end of her life, however, she was able to perceive the inestimable quality of that treasure which she had conceived and given to the world. It was Baha'u'llah who eventually enabled her to discover the value of that hidden treasure, which had lain for so many years concealed from her eyes. She was living in Iraq, where she hoped to spend the remaining days of her life, when Baha'u'llah instructed two of his devoted followers, Haji Sayyid Javad-i Karbilai and the wife of Haji Abdul Majid-i Shirazi, both of whom were already intimately acquainted with her, to instruct her in the principles of the faith. She acknowledged the truth of the cause and remained until the closing years of the 13th century AH, that is, the 13th century AH ended in October AD 1882, when she departed this life, fully aware of the bountiful gifts which the Almighty had chosen to confer upon her. The wife of the Bab, unlike his mother, perceived at the earliest dawn of his revelation the glory and uniqueness of his mission, and felt from the beginning the intensity of its force. No one except Tahiri, among the women of her generation, surpassed her in the spontaneous character of her devotion, nor excelled the fervor of her faith. To her the Bab confided the secret of his future sufferings, and unfolded to her eyes the significance of the events that were to transpire in his day. He bade her not to divulge this secret to his mother, and and counselled her to be patient and resigned to the will of God. He entrusted her with a special prayer, revealed and written by himself, the reading of which, he assured her, would remove her difficulties and lighten the burden of her woes. In the hour of your perplexity, he directed her, recite this prayer ere you go to sleep. I myself will appear to you and will banish your anxiety. Faithful to his advice, every time she turned to him in prayer, the light of his unfailing guidance illumined her path and resolved her problems. After the Bab had settled the affairs of his household and provided for the future maintenance of both his mother and his wife, he transferred his residence from his own home to that of Haji Mirza Syed Ali. There he awaited the approaching hour of his sufferings. He knew that the afflictions which were in store for him could no longer be delayed, that he was soon to be caught in a whirlpool of adversity which would carry him swiftly to the field of martyrdom, the crowning object of his life. He bade those of his disciples who had settled in Shiraz, among whom were Mullah Abdul Karim and Sheikh Hassan-i Zunuzi, to proceed to Isfahan and there await his further instructions. Syed Hussein-i Yazdi, one of the Letters of the Living, who had recently arrived at Shiraz, was likewise instructed to proceed to Isfahan and join the company of his fellow disciples in that city. Meanwhile, Hussein Khan, the governor of Fars, was bending every effort to involve the Bab in fresh embarrassments and to degrade him still further in the eyes of the public. The smouldering fire of his hostility was fanned to flame by the knowledge that the Bab was allowed to pursue unmolested the course of his activities, that he was still able to associate with certain of his companions, and that he continued to enjoy the benefits of unrestrained fellowship with his family and kindred. By the aid of his secret agents, he succeeded in obtaining accurate information regarding the character and influence of the movement which the Bab had initiated. He had secretly watched his movements, ascertained the degree of enthusiasm which he had aroused, and scrutinized the motives, the conduct, and the number of those who had embraced his cause. One night there came to Hussein Khan, the chief of his emissaries, with a report that the number of those who were crowding to see the Bab had assumed such proportions as to necessitate immediate action on the part of those whose function it was to guard the security of that city. "The eager crowd that gathers every night to visit the Bab," he remarked, "surpasses in number the multitude of people that throngs every day before the gates of the seat of your government. Among them are to be seen men celebrated alike for their exalted rank and intensive learning. Such are the tact and lavish generosity which his maternal uncle displays in his attitude towards the officials of your government, that no one among your subordinates is inclined to acquaint you with the reality of the situation. If you would permit me, I will, with the aid of a number of your attendants, surprise the Bab at the hour of midnight, and will deliver, handcuffed, into your hands certain of his associates who will enlighten you concerning his activities, and who will confirm the truth of my statements." Hussein Khan refused to comply with his wish. "I can tell better than you," was his answer, "what the interests of the state require. Watch me from a distance. I shall know how to deal with him." That very moment, the governor summoned Abdul Hamid Khan, the chief constable of the city. "Proceed immediately," he commanded him, "to the house of Haji Mirza Syed Ali. Quietly and unobserved, scale the wall and ascend to the roof, and from there suddenly enter his home. Arrest the Syedi Bab immediately, and conduct him to this place together with any of the visitors who may be present with him at that time. Confiscate whatever books and documents you are able to find in that house. As to Haji Mirza Syed Ali, it is my intention to impose upon him the following day the penalty for having failed to redeem his promise. I swear by the imperial diadem of Muhammad Shah that this very night I shall have the Syedi Bab executed together with his wretched companions. Their ignominious death will quench the flame they have kindled, and will awaken every would-be follower of that creed to the danger that awaits every disturber of the peace in this realm. By this act I shall have extirpated a heresy, the continuance of which constitutes the gravest menace to the interest of the state." Abdul Hamid Khan retired to execute his task. He, together with his assistants, broke into the house of Haji Mirza Syed Ali on the 23rd of September AD 1845, and found the Bab in the company of his maternal uncle and a certain Syed Qasim-i Zanjani, who was later martyred in Mazindaran, and whose brother, Syed Murtaza, was one of the 7 martyrs of Tehran. He immediately arrested them, collected whatever documents he could find, ordered Haji Mirza Syed Ali to remain in his house, and conducted the rest to the seat of government. The Bab, undaunted and self-possessed, was heard to repeat this verse of the Quran: "That with which they are threatened is for the morning. Is not the morning near?" No sooner had the chief constable reached the marketplace than he discovered, to his amazement, that the people of the city were fleeing from every side in consternation, as if overtaken by an appalling calamity. He was struck with horror when he witnessed the long train of coffins being hurriedly transported through the streets, each followed by a procession of men and women loudly uttering shrieks of agony and pain. This sudden tumult, the lamentations, the affrighted countenances, the imprecations of the multitude distressed and bewildered him. He inquired as to the reason. "This very night," he was told, "a plague of exceptional virulence has broken out." It was, in fact, the outbreak of cholera. "We are smitten by this devastating power. Already, since the hour of midnight, it has extinguished the lives of over 100 people. Alarm and despair reign in every house. The people are abandoning their homes, and in their plight are invoking the aid of the Almighty." A footnote says, the Bab refers to this incident in the Dalail-i-Sabi in the following terms: "Recall the first days of the manifestation, how many people died of cholera. That was one of the wonders of the manifestation, yet no one understood it. During 4 years the scourge raged among the Mohammedan Shiites without anyone grasping its true significance." From the Book of 7 Proofs, translated by A.L.M. Nicholas, pages 61 to 62. Abdul Hamid Khan, terrified by this dreadful intelligence, ran to the home of Hussein Khan. An old man who guarded his house and was acting as doorkeeper informed him that the house of his master was deserted, that the ravages of the pestilence had devastated his home and afflicted the members of his household. 2 of his Ethiopian maids, he was told, and a manservant have already fallen victims to this scourge, and members of his own family are now dangerously ill. In his despair my master has abandoned his home and, leaving the dead unburied, has fled with the rest of his family to the Baha'I Takht. Footnote says a garden in the outskirts of Shiraz. Abdul Hamid Khan decided to conduct the Bab to his own home and keep him in his custody pending instructions from the governor. As he was approaching his house, he was struck by the sound of weeping and wailing of the members of his household. His son had been attacked by the plague and was hovering on the brink of death. In his despair he threw himself at the feet of the Bab and tearfully implored him to save the life of his son. He begged him to forgive his past transgressions and misdeeds. "I adjure you," he entreated the Bab as he clung to the hem of his garment, "by him who has elevated you to this exalted position, to intercede in my behalf and to offer a prayer for the recovery of my son. Suffer not that he in the prime of his youth be taken away from me. Punish him not for the guilt which his father has committed. I repent of what I have done, and at this moment resign my post. I solemnly pledge my word that never again will I accept such a position, even though I perish of hunger." The Bab, who was in the act of performing his ablutions and was preparing to offer the prayer of dawn, directed him to take some of the water with which he was washing his face to his son and request him to drink it. This, he said, would save his life. No sooner had Abdul Hamid Khan witnessed the signs of the recovery of his son than he wrote a letter to the governor, in which he acquainted him with the whole situation and begged him to cease his attacks on the Bab. "Have pity on yourself," he wrote to him, "as well as on those whom Providence has committed to your care. Should the fury of this plague continue its fatal course, no one in this city, I fear, will by the end of this day have survived the horror of its attack." Hussein Khan replied that the Bab should be immediately released and given freedom to go wherever he might please. As soon as an account of these happenings reached Tehran and was brought to the attention of the Shah, an imperial edict dismissing Hussein Khan from office was issued and sent to Shiraz. From the day of his dismissal, that shameless tyrant fell a victim to countless misfortunes, and was in the end unable to earn even his daily bread. No one seemed willing or able to save him from his evil plight. When, at a later time, Baha'u'llah had been banished to Baghdad, Hussein Khan sent him a letter in which he expressed repentance and promised to atone for his past misdeeds on condition that he should regain his former position. Baha'u'llah refused to answer him. Sunk in misery and shame, he languished until his death. The BAB, who was staying at the home of Abdul Hamid Khan, sent Sayyid Kazim to request Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali to come and see him. He informed his uncle of his intended departure from Shiraz, entrusted both his mother and his wife to his care, and charged him to convey to each the expression of his affection and the assurance of God's unfailing assistance. Wherever they may be, he told his uncle as he bade him farewell, God's all-encompassing love and protection will surround them. I will again meet you amid the mountains of Azerbaijan, from whence I will send you forth to obtain the crown of martyrdom. I myself will follow you, together with one of my loyal disciples, and will join you in the realm of eternity. Chapter 10. The BAB